Howdy everyone, this is Wolfcanus, and today we are back in the world of single-player Tarkov. As promised in my last video, I'm going to be going through some of the mod settings, going a little bit more in depth into a couple of them. Today specifically, I'm going to be looking at swag+donuts. So we're going to be looking at the in-game settings as well as the config files that you can find in your mod folder. I'm not just going to tell you what settings to change and say, okay, set this to this, set this setting to this, goodbye. I'm going to try and teach you today, sort of, I'm going to try to teach you to sort of think for yourself on these, because the settings are guaranteed to change as future updates roll out and as this mod evolves and grows over time. So I don't want to just teach you for 3.8.3. I want you to kind of get an understanding going forward for the future. So, wasting no more time, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So from the main menu, by default, if you hit F12, Bepinex, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the mod plugin settings menu will pop up. And as you can see, I've got a number of different mods installed already, but we specifically are going to look at this one, devise.donuts. In the future, it might be named something else. Just look for donuts. Swag is something that we're going to be looking at in the actual mod config files in the folders a little bit later. But first, I would go ahead and check advanced settings, so that way you have all of the settings available to you. Because as you can see, these settings that are in yellow, these are not available if you don't have advanced settings checked. So let's go ahead and keep that checked, so that way we have all of the settings available. So this is all default. This is what it would look like after a fresh install. So taking these one by one, I mean, some of these are self-explanatory. Donuts on or off. If you want donuts to control your spawning, check that. So the despawn is important because having a lot of bots spawn during your raids, it can start to tank your performance, especially if there's, you know, a cluster of scavs in the far corner of the map that they're not doing anything, they're not interacting with you, they are going to have no impact on your raid. So what despawn does is the furthest bots from the player, it will sort of just pop them out of existence. So they will despawn, they will disappear, and then the spawn pools that are closest to you will trigger, and more bots will try to spawn closer to you. So you can do that with PMCs or scavs. I personally don't like to do it with PMCs because I like to have closer to a live-like experience. So I don't want, you know, the way that I have mine set up and the way that I'll kind of show you how to do this a little bit later, but I like to have all of the PMCs that are going to be in the raid, I like to have them all spawn at the start, and then they either will die or they will extract on their own. I don't want them to, you know, despawn, or I don't want more to randomly spawn throughout the raid. I like to have a set number. They come in, they either die or they make it out, and that's that. So that's why I like having these two separate. And you know, if you are concerned about performance, or if you just want to make sure that scavs will be active and you'll see more scavs, I would have despawn scavs enabled, and then I would turn despawn PMCs off. But that's just my personal preference. You can make your own choice for how you want to do it. Bot hard cap. This is something that I see a lot of confusion with people, it seems like. So the hard cap, this is just a cap on the number of bots that can spawn per map. So every map has a different cap, and we're going to take a look at this. I'm going to put a pin in this because we're going to look at this a little bit later. You can see the hard cap in a config file in the mod folder, and we are going to take a look at that a little bit later. So if you enable this, it will put a cap on the number of bots that can spawn in your raid. So what that means is once it hits that cap, unless scavs or PMCs either despawn or they die, no new spawns are going to come in. So if you leave this unchecked, you're just going to keep getting spawns throughout. So in conjunction with this cooldown timer, you're going to keep getting spawns continuously throughout your raid. So if you want that, if you have a NASA supercomputer, by all means, go right ahead, leave that unchecked, leave that cap off, just have uncapped spawns, and good luck, Godspeed, because that is one thing with this mod. It does affect your performance. It'll affect your performance pretty drastically if you let it. If you aren't in possession of a NASA supercomputer, I personally would check that hard cap. Also, it's just a little bit more convenient, I think, on the side of when you're going through a raid. I mean, do you want it? If you want it to play like Call of Duty, where there's just constantly enemies around, then by all means. But if you do want to have it more of that live-like experience, by all means, do whatever you like, but just keep that in mind, and it will affect performance. So if you do want to have the optimal performance, I would check this, and then we're gonna look at the caps a little bit later, and we can adjust those as we see fit. One important thing to note with the hard cap is it is a little bit of a double-edged sword. So what I mean by that is, while enabling the hard cap, it will save on performance because less bots will be active during your raid. It will make your raids quieter. It will make them less intense. You will see less bots because there is that cap on how many bots can be in your raid. As I said, there's a little pin in this point specifically because we are going to come back to this when we look at the config files a little bit later. But it is something to keep in mind. It's beneficial in the sense that it will help performance-wise, but without adjustment, leaving it just default, if you don't go any further, if you just check this box, your raids will be quieter. That is something to keep in mind. Cooldown timer, again, you can sort of do a pseudo cap on your bots if you crank this cooldown timer up. So how the cooldown timer works is as soon as a spawn spits out a bot, it'll start this cooldown timer in seconds. So by default, 300 seconds, that's 5 minutes. So that means every 5 minutes, that spawn location will have a chance to spit out another bot. So if you want to have uncapped, but say, 1,000 seconds, so that's about 16, almost 17 minutes. So you could do that. You could uncheck bot hard cap and crank the cooldown timer way up. So that way, if you clear out an area of new spawns, then, for another 16 or so odd minutes, there's not going to be any more bots coming in. You can also just, crank that up somewhere, say, set it to 600 seconds and even 10 minutes. So that way, every 10 minutes, there's a chance that a spawn point will spit out a new bot. I think that's pretty fair if you do have the default raid times. If you do have an extended raid, you might want to change that further. Completely, this is more personal taste. Group chance. So this affects as it says, the odds of PMC groups and group size. So this is affected down here in the advanced settings. So if we look down to section 6, group chance weight distribution. So these, I believe, are weighted on a scale to 500. So if you take the number divided by 500, that's the percentage that for the respective number in the group. So on default, which is this middle tier, 210, 210, 45, 25, 10. So it adds up to 500. So 210 over 500 is 42. So you have a 42% chance by default that you will see an individual or a duo. You have a 9% chance of seeing a trio. You have a 5% chance of seeing a 4-man team, and then you have a 2% chance of seeing a 5-man squad. So looking back up here, so if you like seeing, smaller individual teams, you can set this to lower. You can set these to low. If you like seeing your scavs all in groups, you can, set those to high or max. Guarantee that you will see groups of scavs, teams of scavs. And same with PMCs, if you want, death squads roaming about your map, you can set that to high or max. But if you just leave it at default, you can go down here and change the weight however you like. But yeah, you can, if you really want to change an individual, so if you wanted to make it to where 100% of the time you're always running into a 2-man team or 3-man team, you can adjust that accordingly. Just make sure you do the math, change the respective weight. But this is where you will determine chances as laid out here in these two options. So then spawn difficulty. So spawn difficulty is something that, I would just leave as online, because If you do use Sane, Sane does have more of an impact on the difficulty, I guess the intelligence of the bots. So, I mean, if you want to, this is pretty straightforward. Just the higher that you set it, the smarter the bots are going to be, but it is going to be using the default, Tarkov bot difficulty unless you use Sane. So if you just leave it as online, then it's a pretty even spread of, you're going to get some really dumb bots, but you're going to get some smart bots that play some smart plays. But again, if you use Sane, that has more of a control over the difficulty. So keep that in mind. Other bots, so this is, your raiders, your bosses, etc., etc. Again, you can just leave those as online. All right, so now raid presets. So these are all, so individually, the mod page does describe what each of these individual settings are like. So what these presets do. So we'll take a look. There is a setting there's a config file in the mod folder that we're going to take a look at. We're going to put a pin in this one as well. And we're going to come back to this. But each of these presets sets a sort of cap on, this number of bots is going to spawn for this class of bot. So for PMCs, for example, if you set it to, no starting PMCs, then PMCs just aren't going to spawn at the start of the raid. So if you wanted to go in and not have PMCs and just have scavs, you can do that. If you want to have starting PMCs, so starting PMCs is like what live is. So if you want to go for the live experience, do this group of presets, starting PMCs. So that means that at the start, PMCs are going to spawn in with you, and those are going to be the only PMCs that spawn in throughout the raid. This one is even called live-like. So these are called live-like as well, but they will have extra PMCs spawn. So if you do want to change it up and you want to have, PMCs spawn in the middle of your raid that, might pop up randomly, go ahead, do that. There's quite a few of these, so I would just look at the mod page. Each of these are described as to what they spawn. So just take a look at that and determine for yourself how you want your raid loadout to be. I personally like starting PMCs only live-like because I like to have that sort of live-like experience where you and a group of PMCs are spawning in and then continuously scavs spawn in throughout the raid. So speaking of scavs spawning in throughout the raid, they also have an option. So for this, you can, if you really want a lot of scavs, you can set it to, impossible raids or more scavs or a whole lot of scavs. You can tweak these however you like. So you could essentially give yourself an option to have a raid of only scavs, or have a raid of no scavs and only PMCs, or no PMCs and only scavs. It's completely up to you. Or I would just check out these preset details on the mod page, read through all of them because there's quite a few, and then just make the decision for yourself to see, like, okay, what do I want? How do I want my raid to play? And I encourage you to experiment a little as well. I don't know if any of these presets are going to disappear in the future as the mod evolves, or maybe more presets will come as well. And there's also options to create your own presets. Completely, the world is your oyster here. And then if you do set it to a random, if one of these is set to a random down here, live-like random, starting PMCs only random, etc. If you want to know which random scenario is selected, just check that and it'll tell you, starting PMCs only live-like. So down to additional spawn settings. Force PMC faction, you can, pretty straightforward, spawn only USEX, only bears. Default is an even split. Force bot type for all spawns. So again, kind of looking back at your preset selection, if you wanted to not mess with those presets, but you wanted to force all scavs, all PMCs, you could do that there. Hard stop spawns. So this is kind of something you have to keep in mind, like with the bot hard caps. So hard stops is, say you have, 300 seconds. So you have 5 minutes left in your raid, spawns are going to be cut off. So if every single bot is dead and there's 5 minutes left, no more bots are going to spawn. It's going to be an empty raid. So that's something that you can pay attention to if you do have longer raids enabled. If you do have, those multiple hour-long raids, if you wanted to set it to, if you wanted to adjust that, this is in seconds. So if you wanted to make a cutoff point where, okay, you've killed, so many scavs and PMCs, now you just want, to have a quiet raid for the rest of the time, you can set that. And you have to just click enable and then change the number in seconds, and you'll have that hard stop in place. Same thing for scavs, as PMCs. Just enable that hard stop, and there you go. Change the number in seconds. Hotspots, boosts, and hard caps ignored. So these settings, so various hotspot points. Hotspot points are, you know, say in customs, I believe in customs, dorms is one. I think scav base might be one. Essentially, the known hotspots in the map where this is where shit's going down. So this is where there's kind of guaranteed to be more of a there's more guaranteed high activity. So if you want to ensure that, if you want to set it to where, okay, I want it to be more likely that every time that I go to dorms, there's gonna be PMCs there. So you can check that to be boosted to where, you know, if check these to be boosted, so that way, you know, if it's a couple minutes into your raid and, you know, there's already quite a few deaths out there, you can boost these spawns so that way it's more likely that those hotspots are going to experience higher spawns. So it's going to be more likely that you're going to run into enemy bots at those hotspots. So if you do have your cap enabled, this will ignore that. So say you have a cap and it's 6 PMCs. If there's already 6 PMCs, they're all still alive. They're in other parts of the map. If you have this ignored, it can spawn in, you know, 7th, 8th, however many. It'll spawn in more PMCs in those hotspots. That way, it's even more of a guarantee that these hotspots in this map, you're gonna see activity. You're gonna see some action. So yeah, even the description strongly recommends using these plus despawn plus hard cap, just to kind of force simulate that intense live-like experience. So global minimum spawn distance. So this, if you check this, it will use these numbers. If I had to guess, I would say these are in meters. But if you check this, that means that the minimum spawn distance from your location, if there's a spawn pool within this minimum distance, bots won't spawn there. So this essentially just makes it so you won't get, in meters, this essentially makes it to where bots will spawn away from you. So you won't get, you know, in factory, you won't get bots spawning right on your ass because there's a lot of different spawns in there. I would check this personally just because it's really annoying if a bot spawns right behind you and just kills you immediately, because that's just really dumb. So this adds the same thing, but it's to other bots. So this ensures that other bots won't spawn on top of each other and just immediately kill each other. This is good for performance because if you think about it, every time that a bot spawns, it does sort of slow the game's performance. So if you have a bunch of bots spawning on top of each other and then they kill each other and then more bots have to spawn and then they spawn on top of each other and they kill each other and more bots spawn, you can kind of see where I'm going there. It creates a sort of snowball effect. So I would check that to make sure that whenever there's a, you know, spawn wave, they're not just spawning on top of each other and killing each other. All right, so now we're diving into the advanced settings here. So we already went over the group chance weight distribution, but looking at advanced spawn settings. So this is the number of, say, call it ticks that a spawn will go through to try and spit out a bot. I would knock this down to maybe 15 or even 10, just to sort of not lose more performance, because again, every time that a bot tries to spawn, it will inhibit your performance. So I would turn that down just so that way every time a bot is about to spawn, there's less work for the server to do if it's not trying as many times. And then same for this. So this is the interval of which, if you have despawns enabled, this is the interval with which it will attempt to despawn a bot. So every 10 seconds, it will check and try to despawn a bot. You can adjust that as you wish. I'm personally not an expert on what is the optimal interval for this. I mean, I might just leave it as default if I were you. Debugging, I would just, you know, ignore that. You don't. You only need to mess with debugging if you know what you're doing. So if you know that you need to be adjusting these, then you likely already know what to do. And then spawn point markers. Yeah, spawn point markers and creating temporary JSONs. Again, this is something that if you're gonna mess with these, you likely already know what you're doing. So I would just leave these alone for the time being, except I would clear this hotkey for creating a temp JSON file because some other mods do use keypad minus. Yeah, for example, FOVFix uses it. So I would just clear that. And then as far as in-game donut settings goes, that's it, you're good to go. So with single player Tarkov closed, with the server closed, launcher closed, you're first going to want to go to BepInEx, plugins, and then look for donuts. Alright, so now under donuts, you have a few JSON files as well as your spawn patterns. So first we're gonna look at random scenario config. So this is if you have your preset set to any of the randoms. So this is where you can see which presets fall into which random scenario. And then you can adjust the weight for the likelihood of that being spawned. Or you can adjust the weight for the likelihood of that preset being chosen under your sort of umbrella scenario. So for, for example, starting PMCs, you're more likely to get live-like, a little less likely to get live-like alt, and then pretty rarely gonna get only late scavs. So this is if you really want to play with the random scenarios, this is where you can adjust those weights. Yeah, I believe you can also add in more presets under these and give them their own weight. That's something I would only mess with if you really know what you're doing. So looking next at scenario config. So this is the bot limits that you're going to see. So all of those presets that you saw in that in-game menu, you can see that they're represented here, and each of them has PMC bot limits and scav bot limits. So what you want to do is, so in-game, whichever preset that you chose, you're going to want to scroll down and find it, or you can of course Control F, and then you're going to have your limits to however many bots or however many scavs and PMCs under that preset per map. So say you want to adjust these, bump these up a little bit more. You want to have more PMCs in factory. Great. You can set that to from 6 to 8, whatever you want it to be, and change scavs from 6 to 12. Have a crazy number of scavs. Whatever you want to set that to. This is where you're going to find the specific numbers for your preset to adjust those to your liking. So, with that in mind, you're going to want to go back to your main SPT menu, go to Users, go to Mods, and then go down to Swag, and then go into the Config folder, and open Config JSON. So, scroll all the way down. So this is your max bot cap. So what you were just adjusting with your presets, you're going to want to make sure that those fit into this max bot cap, and make sure that do keep in mind you might have bosses, and those bosses might have bodyguards. So make sure that you leave some wiggle room. Remembering back to that hard cap that we put in, or that maybe you didn't put in. This is the ceiling for how many bots can spawn in per map, and you can adjust it daytime and nighttime. Yeah, so for example, on Factory, there will never be more than 18 bots in the map. Customs, never be more than 26 bots in the map. And if you do have, a boss, multiple bosses even, so say on Customs, you have Reshala and you have the goons spawn. So that's 3 goons, and then Reshala plus, his, 4 or 5 bodyguards. So it's going to be about 9 scav bots that they're counted as. So just keep that in mind when you're adjusting, going back, when you're adjusting these bot limits, just keep in mind the max bot cap that you have in place, and you're going to want to kind of just play with those. But yes, so that's where you're going to determine how many bots can spawn in your map. Just play with those numbers. I encourage you to experiment and see, how much can your computer handle, how many bots can you have in there and maintain, a steady frame rate, 60 FPS, 45 FPS, whatever you're going for. And again, keep in mind, more bots will be less frames just because of the way that this mod works. Yes, also in this config JSON, you're going to see spawn chance for the special scav types, so bloodhounds, cultists, raiders, rogues, scav, snipers. So this is where you can adjust the spawn chance. So if you do have a mod like SVM, server value modifier, which does have spawn chance modifiers in there, this will overwrite SVM. So this is where, if you have swag+donuts, this is where you're going to want to change spawn chance. So bloodhounds, if you want it to be more likely that you get them, just change, you know, from 5% to 50% or whatever you want to do. Same with cultists, raiders, rogues, scav snipers. Just change, these numbers are weighted from 0 to 100, so 100% you're going to get them every raid, 0% you'll never see them. And it's the exact same with the boss config JSON, which you'll see just above. So boss config, you'll see first total bosses per map, -1, this is correct, this is what you want to leave it as. This just means that the total bosses are uncapped. So various maps that have multiple bosses, so look at Streets for example. Streets has Kaban and Kalente, so if you set this to 1, only 1 boss would spawn. So I would just leave this at -1, it just leaves it uncapped, don't mess with that. So then, pretty straightforward, this is where you adjust the spawn chance for bosses. So if you want a particular boss to spawn more often than not, you can adjust this. So say Gluhar, you want him to spawn 100% of the time or close to it, so I like to typically set these to like 90, so most of the time you're going to get a boss in your raid, but you know, sometimes you might get a quieter raid that doesn't have any bosses. So you can go through, and this is especially helpful for those quests that you have where you have to get, you know, multiple kills on a boss, or you have to just find the boss in general. It just makes it a lot nicer to be able to spawn them more often than not. And then it does have custom bosses. I believe Punisher and Legion are modded bosses. Don't enable them if you don't have the mods that include them. It'll kick back an error in your server. It won't let you play it anyway. But yeah, if you want to have the Santa Claus event, he is included with base game. So if you want Santa to come in, you can adjust his spawn rate as well. Yeah, and then there are ways to have bosses show up in other maps. You do need to adjust their spawn points, however, and those are all unique to maps. That's a little bit outside the scope of this video to set that up, but just know that is something you can do. It is just a little bit more hands-on, and so therefore it's a little bit outside of the scope of this video. But just know that is possible. So if you wanted to have all of the bosses in factory or something, all the bosses in customs, that is possible. You can do that. Alright, so that'll just about do it for today. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you saw that, you know, swag+donuts really isn't that complicated. It's all pretty straightforward when you get down into it. There's just some prior knowledge. Make sure that you read the mod page. Everything that I told you today, you can find out for yourself by just reading the mod page, but I know that some people learn things a little bit differently. Sometimes it's easier to learn something just from watching it in a video or hearing someone tell it to you directly. So I hope that you learned something useful. I hope that you are now able to adjust your bots and their spawns the way that you want them to be. You can have it set up just like live, or have it set up way differently and something that is enjoyable to you. So either way, I hope you got something useful out of this video. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know if you want me to go over anything else, if there's something that I missed that you had questions about. Yeah, just leave it in the comments below. And, you know, if you want to see more single-player Tarkov content, I will be playing. I am trying to set up, I'm going to set up a 0 to hero run at some point. So if you're interested in seeing that, hit subscribe, check out all future content from me. I do play plenty of other games as well. And yeah, I hope you all learned something and enjoyed it at the same time. But yeah, for now, I will see you all next time.